All right, so yeah, I'm here to talk about millennials. And I want to talk at the outset just about generations in general. You know, we live in an economy where context is everything. I got educated I studied two subjects, biochemistry and economics. I liked both those subjects because one was about how we work at the molecular level, the other is about how the world works. And to me, that's still the most important thing for all of us as sellers to understand. It's great to actually follow Keith. Keith has helped me in my career. He did some great work with us up at Microsoft when I ran the Unified Communications Group and was the general manager there. Helped to build one of the fastest billion-dollar businesses Microsoft ever built. Actually, $2.5 billion in revenue that will happen in that business. And one of the things we learned there was just how important it was to understand what trends were really going to affect the way people wanted to collaborate, communicate, and to connect. And that really has varied from generation to generation. You know, if you go back to and you think about this at the highest level, there's 5 generations we've had in the last 100 years, right? There was the greatest generation, those folks that were born, and these are generally in 20-year increments. People can debate, you know, whether it's specific years, but if you think about in 20-year increments, the greatest generation was from 1900 to 1920. These folks were spectacular. They were the greatest because they overcame the most obstacles. They had 2 world wars. You know, they overcame a global depression. They were just spectacular, and they were wonderfully altruistic in their approach. That generation was followed by the silent generation, which is the folks from 1920 to 1940. And these folks were silent because they were small. There was so much time being spent in war and everything else that, frankly, we had a contraction in the population of birth that was happening during that period from 1920 to 1940. And that generation is interesting because they were very altruistic, but they followed the mantras set by their predecessors. They didn't shake things up very effectively. They got the benefit of all kinds of wonderful programs that were set up in the wartime eras. Products were proliferating as a result of the investments that had been happening. And then they were followed by the next generation, which we all know of, the baby boomers, right, that really changed things up. I think of the greatest generation as kind of the classical folks that set up a lot of the thinking that we had. You know, sort of a dark age or a little bit of loss of innovation that happened during the silent generation. And if there was a renaissance that occurred, it was certainly with the baby boomers that things really got disrupted during that time frame. And frankly, it was a social disruption that we mostly saw during that period of time. And it was really important because it changed the way we lived, the way we operate, and everything else. That generation was followed by Generation X, which are people born between 1960 and 1980. I'm a part of that generation myself. And the generation of Generation X is kind of interesting because we actually were very positive. We had all kinds of good beliefs and dreams. Ronald Reagan told us about this great economic revolution that was going to go on, and we actually had a wonderful economy during most of that time frame. But unfortunately, during the more recent periods, and the millennials that came after us, frankly, had a very different kind of scenario. They look back and realize that during that period of time, and this is from 1980 to folks born from 1980 to the year 2000, they went through a number of recessionary periods. They graduated with the biggest debt of any sort of college group in history. They saw their parents and their grandparents having to get second jobs after savings and loans crises or a downturn in the economy around the actual bursting of the tech bubble. They saw all kinds of issues occurring during the most recent recession when we lost so much value in our real estate. And they have a different idea of how they should live their lives and how they should experience and not wait the way that their parents did to actually enjoy life in general. How many of you folks in this room are part of let me just see those folks that are part of the baby boomer generation okay, so it's about maybe 10, 20% of the folks. How about Generation X? Great, okay, that's about probably at least half. How about the millennial generation? Okay, so about maybe, a third or so. That's great. I'm going to show you a quick video that characterizes some of the differences of perspective that these bring up. And I want to show you this because I think it's super important for us to understand. And then I'm going to talk about just how big a shift we're going to go through with this new generation. So let's go ahead and roll this video.
So, Marathon Industries, give me a breakdown.
It's a B2B company that provides cloud storage for Fortune 500 companies.
Chet, what did the market research turn up?
What? Oh, I Googled them, but the results were weird.
You didn't use the market research database that we spent thousands of dollars a month on and that you were specifically trained to use.
I quit. This job is different than I thought it would be.
Stop. Does this situation look familiar? A new type of worker has entered the workforce. They're called Millennials, and they're terrible. Today, I'm going to teach you all about this new breed of worker so you can avoid misunderstandings in which you feel the need to fire them immediately. In the first reimagination we just saw, Mary makes the classic mistake of not reassuring Chet while offering overflowing amounts of praise.
Chet, you were so smart to use Google. That's the perfect way to start the research. You're so smart.
Great job.
Here's that report that you asked for.
Thanks.
Morgan did exactly what was asked of her. Nothing more, nothing less. She expects a raise and promotion.
Thanks. Junior Executive Manager of Data Consulting.
Is that better than Assistant Manager of Junior Accounts?
Yes.
Oh my God, thank you. I'm gonna go call my parents.
Now you're getting it.
You got a job. Congratulations. That must have been hard considering the financial crisis the baby boomers caused. The first thing you may notice is that this generation has an outdated understanding of technology and productivity. They may think we're on our phones texting and twittering all day, but we should cut them some slack. When they were growing up, their parents drank and took naps at work, and their phones look like this. Also, when you're busy using your phone to do your boss's work for them, don't expect any sort of raise, promotion, or commendation for your hard work. They've earned their salary with status and age. Your job is to be taken advantage of and let them take credit for all your innovative ideas. After all, without them, you wouldn't even be here. That's not to say you don't deserve this job. You've got thousands of dollars in student loan debt and years of diverse experiences from unpaid internships to show for yourself. Of course, if your baby boomer employers hadn't invented unpaid internships as a way of making slavery legal again, you'd probably be a lot further in your career than you are now. But this is neither here nor there.
All right, so hopefully you guys enjoyed that. That's a quick synopsis of some of the stereotypes that are out there, but it's super important to note. It's not just that 50% of millennials, or that we'll have 50% of the workforce as millennials within 5 years. It's that there'll be 75% of the workforce by 2020, and that's a super, super important trend because it's such a big population. They are the echo boomers, right? Even compared to Generation X, it's such a much larger class of folks. And certainly for all of us, that means as managers and leaders in organizations, we've got to find a way of bridging the divide and getting the most capabilities and talent that we can out of that group. And we got to find a way to make sure that we're all working from the same sheet of music. So, the thing to recognize here that is so incredibly important is that this generation is the first generation that really is a digital native. They were born with technology in their hands. They were raised on the internet. They're far more comfortable in that environment than those of us that were a part of prior generations all up. And for them, their expectation about how they work is so much different than our own. If you're from those older generations, we've got to find a way to make sure that we're equipping them with tools, strategies, and techniques to get the most out of the experience because they are the future. We can complain or use these funny stereotypes and everything else, but this is the future of how we're going to work. And frankly, I'm really excited about it. In my organization at ClearSlide, our average age is 28, and I bias and skew that heavily. There's 3 or 4 of us. Without us, the average age would be in the lower 20s. So it's shocking, but that is the world of selling that we're all moving toward. And more important than that, it's the world of buying that we're going toward. The thing to understand about these folks, millennials are spectacularly good at multitasking. They're really well connected. They're socially oriented. They were programmed from very early age to do all kinds of different sports. Their calendars were packed. They were moving through things. They were told they're all going to be successful. They really do a great job of teaming. They actually, in some cases, don't like the idea of competing. They want to see everybody winning. They're more altruistic that way. They're overachievers. They like to have fun in games. I mean, these folks are spectacularly energetic, and they're willing to do a lot of things. So it's important to understand that they've got a different sort of profile than those of us that were born prior to that. Here's a little word chart that kind of lays out some of the common descriptive elements that people will actually use to talk about this generation all up. And there's a lot of great things that come from this, right? Being digital natives and having the confidence to know that you can find all kinds of great information at your fingertips and get references from your friends and colleagues is spectacular. This is changing the way people are buying, and it's changing the way we need to sell. The reality is customers in the future, the millennial buyers that are out there, that 75% in the next 10, 20 years that we're going to have to deal with are much different. They actually do a lot of additional things on their own. They do their own research. As I mentioned, they love to collaborate. They're not loyal to price or to people. They're loyal to the best opportunity that's out there, and they know how to find it. And they're more confident in their ability to actually do that without having to actually talk to a salesperson or to rely on a bunch of slick marketing collateral. They have shorter attention spans. You know, you can't just walk in and have a consultative discussion with them unless you're doing something a bit different. And they really like the idea of purchasing in a consensus fashion. If you look at it, the number of stakeholders we're having to navigate in selling today is dramatically higher than it has been historically, and it's only going to get worse. So we've got to get very good at being sure we know how to bring together various stakeholders into a B2B kind of purchase choice in particular, because it's so important. Millennials will not be trying to make those calls on their own. They're not wired that way. They don't believe that's the best way to get business done. And they want to be sure that they're not exposed, when they're going to make an important choice. And they've got other stakeholders bought into that process. They also are convinced that, that they can do a better job, as I mentioned, of educating themselves. In fact, this is a great stat from the Corporate Executive Board. 57% of the way through the buying process is where most millennial buyers actually engage a salesperson. That is a long way down the road compared to where we used to be in selling. That means they're going to have biases already. They're going to have knowledge of the space. It may not be correct, but they'll have done a lot more research than prior generations would have, and they're going to be far more focused with their questions and be more demanding of us as salespeople than ever before. That is creating a larger and larger gap between the way we used to sell and buy. And certainly, customers are going to be driving more of the purchasing process than ever before as a result of this. The early stages of qualifying and doing the intro calls and working through the discovery process are going to be handled more independently online through networks and other elements. So it's super important that as sellers, we recognize and value that folks will have done this kind of research and really work on adding as much value to earn the right to the later stage conversations that are out there, and realize that millennial buyers in particular are going to have a purchasing process that is going to involve other people, but they may not know who those people are. And you've got to help them navigate and figure out what the best path is, and typically use your own information about how you've sold to other folks, other companies, other industries, to provide some guidance in a way that adds value in that conversation. That does not mean that selling is going away. It means the type of selling that we're doing has to change. When I first started selling 25 years ago, we were still far more focused on product selling. The earlier generations were certainly product-oriented, but then in the 80s and 90s, we all got on the bandwagon of solution selling, which is spectacular. We started thinking more from the customer's point of view. We started adding value in the selling process. We started doing a lot more discovery questions to align with their agenda rather than our own, and that's all great. But those lengthy discovery processes that we went through are no longer going to be afforded to us as easily as they used to be. The reality is most millennials think that they know what's going on. They generally think they know what products and services they're going to buy. And unless we come in with a fairly important, disruptive, insight-based approach very early in the conversation, they are not going to suffer us older fools very, very wisely, because they don't want to see us wasting much time asking questions that may sound irrelevant when they're further down the purchasing process, at least in thinking about that, than we may have historically been. And the sellers who are going to excel in the future are the ones who can really quickly figure out where the millennial buyer is in that process, add value, ask things that might be a bit controversial, demonstrate value very early on in the conversation to earn the right to that longer discovery process. It doesn't mean solution selling is going away. It just means we've got to earn the right to go through those solution selling steps with those millennial buyers who have a much more challenging criteria for where they want to spend time. Now, as sales managers, this means we've got to adapt some of our strategies around the way we should approach things. We need to make sure we're bringing in buyers or bringing in sellers and approaching buyers differently. And there's 5 key things that we've seen are really changing the way that millennials need to be coached and trained and the way that we need to do outreach. And that's what I want to talk through. And these are some of the quick tips that we certainly run at Clearslide all of our clients through. The first is to make sure that you're really driving sales engagement with more modern tools. Second, the most important tool is our mobile technologies. There's just no doubt that we are now attached to our phones. Our customers expect to be served at a moment's notice. We have to use the latest and greatest mobile technologies within that tool set. The third is social selling and marketing is the future. It's like country clubs were back in the past. My dad was a financial service, insurance sales executive. I can remember in the 70s, 80s, spending a lot of time in our club playing golf and tennis and entertaining clients. We don't do that anymore. We spend time in social communities talking about valuable topics of interest, and if you're not in those communities, that's a challenge. The fourth is we've got to break through the actual clutter because now we're more inundated than ever with messages. We're bombarded. We know that our buyers are getting so many messages thrown at them. If you don't have the ability to break through that clutter, you're going to find yourself at a serious disadvantage. And the fifth is to recognize that as managers, millennials don't actually need to be coached or trained the same way. They will do a lot of their own coaching and training if you just open up a transparent environment where they can see what their peers are actually doing. So using platforms that make that possible is important. I'm going to jump into a couple things here on each of these strategies and give you a little more insight. So on increasing sales engagement with modern tools, you know, we all know that unfortunately the percentage of time salespeople are spending actually engaging with customers has been dropping over the last decade. It's not going up, it's been dropping, which means the time you spend has to be super valuable, has to be well thought through, and you've got to make sure that you're doing everything you possibly can to engage with customers as effectively as you can. We find that you can actually now achieve much better length meetings actually not going in person. We all like to get in-person meetings, of course. It's great. You get all the visual cues. You get to spend time building a relationship. But the reality is you can pick up many more meetings online these days and have longer meetings online than you can in person. We've got studies that demonstrate that, and if you're not really good at helping jump people into an online meeting at a moment's notice, you're going to be at a major disadvantage, and there's lots of platforms that make that possible for us. But that's a super important insight and tool that we should be going after. This is a great slide from Gartner that lays out the future of what they expect CRM and customer engagement and selling to look like. And that's that our digital content, all the materials, all the case studies, the collateral, the white papers, should live in the cloud in an accessible way, and that our customers should be able to see that by way of emails we send them, and that information, when they open those emails, should be available to us. We should know the moment somebody clicks on our emails. We should know what content they've picked up, what pages they actually spent time with. And there are platforms now that make that possible very, very easily. Clearside's one of them. We should be able to present at a moment's notice from our mobile phone, from a tablet device, and we should be able to collaborate on the phone or over the web as effectively as we would in an in-person meeting. And when we're actually on site, we should be able to collect that information, know who we met with, and that should get synced back into our CRM system so that we're spending a lot less time on self-reported information and a lot more time just getting the data uploaded on our behalf of what materials have been presented and putting in notes of responses or follow-up. And all this information should be available with viewing analytics, accessible on all of our devices. This is the future of CRM that we're moving toward. And if you're not embracing this now, you're going to find yourself at a disadvantage versus other folks. Our platform does a lot of that around email, web, phone, in person. Other companies have point solutions in these areas as well. But this is the kind of future that we're all moving toward. And what it does is it accelerates your sales cycles. It makes it much more effective in the way that you do your outreach. And it empowers particularly millennial audiences to really use the technologies they grew up with and encourages people to then take those sales jobs and feel like they are more professional, that we're catering to their needs, not teaching them to sell the old way, but equipping them to sell the new way. There's nothing more important than doing this on a mobile device, as I mentioned. 87% of millennials will use between 2 and 3 mobile devices at least once on a daily basis, right? And those numbers are only going up. And you don't have to be a millennial in that case. And what they're doing is they're merging their personal life, their business life, their community life through social platforms. They have a preference for that. They get concierge services through that. People know their preferences. They don't mind sharing where their locational data is. They're unconcerned about privacy. They expect the world to cater to them the same way they grew up. And in fact, we need to equip them with tools that make that possible. This converged digital life is the life of the future. It's uncomfortable for some of us that are older, but it is the way we're going to be living in the future. There's no question about it. And millennials are 2.5 times more likely to be early adopters of all the new technologies that are coming out than any other generation prior to that. So again, this is only going to accelerate. And the generation after millennials, Generation Z, they're on a whole other planet around this thing. So we need to, again, start embracing this stuff. Social sales and marketing communities are critically important. And that's because this is where millennials spend time. They expect that the brand messages that are being sent out through traditional advertising channels are all biased. They don't want biased information. They want unbiased information, and their social networks provide them with that. Reference points that are super important to the way that they make choices and decisions. And they're more likely to become far more loyal to companies that spend time investing in those channels and those communities. In fact, 58% of millennials expect their brands that they're going to purchase from to really publish content online before they're willing to make any kind of purchase consideration. The most important networks that they're looking at, of course, are Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, Google. There's a number of important networks that these millennials that spend time monitoring as a whole, and we're going to see more and more of these arising in the future. It's super important then for all of us as salespeople, as we're equipping millennials and as we're doing our outreach to millennial buyers, to make sure we are joining those networks and those communities, which is why having a really professional and strong profile on LinkedIn and other places like that, linking to your company's Facebook page and being sure that you're doing everything possible to join those communities is critically important. You can still play golf with your old buddies, but you probably won't find the millennials out there. And they certainly are not going to look at that as the same kind of business kind of enterprise and discussion or place to build a relationship as much as they are more of a social place to actually spend time with friends. The fourth strategy I mentioned is really making sure that with all the messages that come, think about the number of alerts and updates people are now getting through Facebook and LinkedIn and everything else. The clutter that inundates email boxes, the Twitter feeds, everything else is just amazing, right? So what we've got to do is make sure we're breaking through that. This is another sad fact, but it's not getting easier to sell, it's getting harder. Look back in 2007, it took about 4 calls on average, cold call attempts to actually reach a prospect. Now it takes more than 8, and it's going to get worse. So you've got to find a way to be able to break through that. The old formulas we used of sending out a certain number of emails or making a certain number of phone calls, and expecting that to somehow yield great results just isn't going to happen the same way, because the natural conversion rate of that stuff is not what it used to be. And the thing that will change this, and that millennials understand better than everybody else in this room, is that they know that through technology they can figure out who they should be reaching out to more effectively by looking at their profiles, figuring out where people sit in organizations, and we can equip them with that, when to reach out, and what information would be most valuable. And a lot of these digital platforms that are out there are designed to help make this a lot easier. And if you think about that, knowing who, when, and what can really change the effectiveness of outreach that's occurring and get you to a much higher conversion rate. We track, for instance, within ClearSlide, open rates of all of our clients, and certainly the way we do our own outreach, and it's shocking the disparity between certain reps. We've got lots of reps that will get 30 to 40% open rates on emails because they're really good about the way they write their headers. They include video content, multimedia materials. They've done Twitter research or LinkedIn research, and they tailor their messages so effectively that they get these incredible open rates. And our younger reps who are new in the organization will look and say, what are you doing? How is this happening? And they'll replicate that by opening up our platform. We also are finding that if you can just send out information, you can actually sometimes you think a deal might have gone cold or might have gone dead. In the past, it might have been dead, but the reality is maybe you didn't reach somebody at the right time. And if you've got the ability to get an alert later when somebody does cycle back on an email you sent 6 months ago, and you re-engage in that moment, you can really impress folks. So we find a lot of reviving of dead opportunities through that process, and it's shocking how often we'll find that our clients are laying the seeds for opportunities that may not be perfect at this moment, but if they can get an alert 6 months later, they can certainly convert that very effectively. The last strategy I'll talk about as I'm wrapping up is to make sure that we're creating an environment where we can continually improve through peer learning. Millennials don't require the same kind of directive coaching. They are very smart at finding their way through things as long as we'll open up the world to them. If you share stats like this that will show rep by rep or team by team, what kind of engagement rate, what kind of emails and numbers are being sent out, what are the open rates, they will naturally gravitate toward figuring out what are these better reps doing than other folks. And yet oftentimes we've been a little more complacent about sharing these details in any way other than maybe beating people over the head with it. This is a smarter way to do it, and certainly they'll dig into the detail, and there are platforms where you can look at specifically what were the emails, what was the content, gain visibility into the messaging, slide by slide. Where did the good reps spend time? What slides did they skip? Marketing teams can then look at reconstructing slides in a way that's very helpful. The last bit I'll talk about is just gamifying your goals. Millennials in particular love to have successful outcomes, like to have fun with what they're doing. So you can gamify that by using any number of companies. We create gongs and visible recognition through all kinds of different tools. Hoopla is one of the most exciting of those platforms, and there's lots of vendors that can help in this process of moving toward this more millennially oriented digital future. Folks like LinkedIn, which we embrace, or ClearSlide, which I'm a part of, DocuSign to really speed things up in the way that you get deals done. Twitter or Hoopla, these are the kinds of companies that can, millennials just gravitate toward wanting to enjoy. So I hope this gives you a quick overview of at least what we've learned through the process at ClearSlide of engaging millennials, and that'll give you at least some things to think about how you might be able to further tune your own organization up to take advantage of some of these strategies. Thank you.